Okay, so basically we continue still in week 3 on the budgeting techniques. Okay, so I think in the previous class we discussed on the overall overview of the functions of budgeting in public sector organizations, right, for planning and control. So now we will look at specifically what are the techniques that have been practiced in government organizations or in government with regards to how to allocate the budget, okay, or how to distribute the budget, right? Because your understanding should be government as a whole. Okay, now even in the case of Malaysian government, we are now very busy. I think the parliament are looking at discussion, negotiations about the next year budget. Okay, so the discussion is on which year budget for which year?
2021.
2021, exactly. And so, of course, at the parliament level, they will talk about the overall overview and the total budget, okay? But the interesting issue is how all this budget will be distributed across ministries and across government agencies, okay? So that is why, I mean, somehow I think when we discuss this topic, you have that idea and how the preparation take place. And then it will also influence the way budgetary control or the control process is taking place, okay? Right, so budgeting techniques in public sector. So we'll look at basically 3 main: traditional budgeting, online item budgeting, zero-based, and then program-based budgeting. Right, if you look at the first, you know, it's about development of budgeting techniques. Right, preliminary questions. Have a quick look. How to improve funding process for public services. Can you see the lecture, the PowerPoints?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, how to reduce government's budget deficit. Okay, I think at this point you fairly exposed to what does it mean by budget deficit for government. Is balanced budget practical? And lastly, effectiveness of planning process. Okay, planning for budgeting purposes, because I think what we have discussed so far, so planning must take place, and then with that, budgeting will be provided, or budget will be provided. So the planning, is it should be based on research-based or purely intuition-based proposals? So intuitions means basically a prior year experience. Is that good enough? Or based on research, okay, getting inputs from various stakeholders, and then what will be the best, and then how to deliver those services in what way, and then, you know, what are the source of solutions. So in a way, you know, I designed it, your assignments, it's almost similar for you to be able to answer those questions as well. Right, any feedback? 1 or 2? From members of the floor? Anyone would like to chip in the answer or the response? Yeah, of course, this is a very hard time, isn't it? Afternoon. All of you have your lunch or too busy with online learning?
Too busy, sir.
Hey, why, brother Hanif, you leave the class? Hanif, Supirno, what
No,
happened?
I'm here, sir.
Oh, okay, all right. So I saw your name left. Okay, right. No response at all, huh? Interesting. Okay, just how to improve funding process. Okay, partly that you will see that through the development of the budgeting techniques. How to reduce government budget deficit. Okay, some of you have that as your assignments. Okay, was that question being posed for this class? Is it okay for government to run budget deficit? Right. Is balanced budget practical? Okay, it's very difficult to see. Yeah, any government is basically having balanced budget. Okay, so what does it mean by balanced budget? Oh, I should call name. Online class, huh? I will call name randomly. Okay. Nadia Suhairi.
So for me, I think balanced budget is when the government give like all the rakyat get the same amount of help.
Okay. One more.
Sir,
Yes.
I think balanced budget is revenue is equal to their expenditure.
Okay. Who, next time you introduce yourself. Your name. What's your name?
Arif, sir.
Okay, Arif. Right. Yes. So basically, balanced budget is more on that. Huh? So government spend based on its revenue. Okay. So it's like, yeah, I mean, the easy way to understand it is like, we learn accounting, isn't it? So debit must equal to credit. Okay, credit revenue must equal the spending. So that is balanced budget. Okay. So if generally, if the expenditures are more than the revenue or the income, then that's how government will face budget deficit. Okay. So how are they going to cover their budget deficit? What option do they have? Iza Atira. Okay, no answer.
Yes, sir.
Yes. How government will cover their budget deficit?
Maybe they take loan from another country.
Yes, they take loan from another country. Yeah, it's possible. But generally, they will issue bonds or take loan from international communities, okay, or international organization. Or they issue government treasury, okay, treasury securities. Okay, so the challenge is, so what will be the denomination of the instruments? Okay, is it based on the local currency or based on international currency? Okay, generally either US dollars. Okay, so that can have different challenges. So, but you can learn that from international finance or international economics. But here we just know that as an option to cover the budget deficit. Okay, that is why it's important to have good planning so that they can. That's why I think the previous government, before the crisis and before the COVID, they have that balanced budget as one of their aims to make sure that the government is on the direction to balance the budget. Okay. Right, these are the budgeting techniques development, okay, from traditional budgeting, or they call it line item budgeting, right? And then, of course, traditional budgeting in the case of Malaysian government during or before the independence, I think mostly, countries across the globe, they are all under colonial power. So during that time, they use a traditional base or line item budgeting because it's very, it's suitable, it's appropriate in that context, in that environment to practice line item budgeting. Okay, and then move on to zero-based budgeting. Okay, move on to planning, programming. Okay, in the case of Malaysia, we move to modified budgeting system, and now the practice is outcome-based budgeting. So if you look at the bottom there, so the move is from, the change is from input-oriented, okay, with regards to traditional base, and then up to program-based, and then move to performance-based budgeting or output or outcome-based budgeting, towards the current practice. So you can see this as development. All these methods are basically complement each other. So improvement are taking place. So I think that's what your thought process should be. That's why you need to understand each technique. Don't look at, since nowadays we are practicing outcome-based budgeting, so we just ignore the old techniques. Yeah, but by right, it should be like that. But in the case of funding process, because it's a government procedures, financial management procedures, so of course the practice remain. Just that a matter of development and modifications. Right, traditional budgeting system, or they call it input-oriented technique, and also known as line item budgeting. So I think line item means referring to budget items. So if you look at the bottom there, a table provided as an example. So based on codes, and then the descriptions, and then the amount. Okay, the codes, they call it general objects. So normally those who many zero, they call it general objects, and with the 11, 12, 13 as sub-objects. So these are the term used. Or in Malay, they call it object am and object berbagai. Okay, so 150,000 means these are the budget allocation. Okay, so I think you must bring in your understanding of budget as opposed to accounting, financial accounting. Okay, this is not GL item, it's a budget item. Okay, so is there any difference between budget item, budget amount, and GL amount? Anyone? Or they are the same?
Should be same.
Should be the same. Okay. So in what way it should be the same? Between budget amount and GL amount, general ledger.
GL is general ledger, isn't it, sir? GL is general ledger.
Yes. Yes. Why do you say that as the same? Okay, let me help you. So 150,000 is the budget allocation at the beginning of the period. Okay, so that's budget allocation. When that will enter into GL once they start payment. Okay, so based on the transactions, in this case, emolument salary, once they start paying, then it becomes GL amount. So the maximum by right, okay, how they become equal at the end of the year. So the amount spent should be 150,000. That will enter into GL, general ledger. Okay, right? So that's how that being reconciled. But of course, government.
So GL shows the balance, is it?
GL show the amount. Yeah, the balance spent, the total amount spent.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, budget is the allocation. Okay, so try to understand. Don't get it confused. But we'll learn GL or financial reporting on the other later on. But here on allocation, okay? Right, so line item means, so these are 10,000 emolument, okay, 20,000, it can be assets, okay, 30,000, it can be supplies, okay? So there are items, I think you can check in your textbooks. So that's what they call it, line item. So how this become a budget technique? Okay, so the allocation of budget in traditional based budgeting. So one is based on extrapolation, based on past year spending level. And then with incremental budgeting, adding allocation for inflation, effect of environments, increase in salary, one-off expenditure, and new programs or projects. Okay, so you can see that from these two items, past year spending level is very important, okay, to determine the amount of budgets. So if last year they spent 1 billion, so next year they should expect to spend at least 1 billion, okay? And then on top of that, there is an incremental amount based on all these factors, okay? So as example here, extrapolation based on past year spending, and then for the next year, 2015, then the total allocation will become higher, okay, because of the increments. So that is based on traditional based budgeting, yeah? Based on past year spending. I mean, you can understand this just like, you know, when you ask a monthly allowance from your parents, okay, they give you, let's say, 300 or 500 a month. Then if you, I mean, it's somehow, if that is sufficient for you, then that will become the basis for monthly money for you, isn't it? So based on the past year spending. Of course, I mean, initially based on the needs. Right, advantage of a traditional based budgeting, simplifying budgeting process. Okay, why it is simplifying? Because based on past year spending. Okay, based on past year spending for future budget allocation. So you must remember the budget allocation, the budget population at the end, the controlling officers must propose to the treasury. Okay, in the treasury there is an officer who evaluate the budget. Okay, his name is Budget Review Officer, PRO. Okay, so another good friend for you. Who is another good friend for you?
Budget review officer.
The main good friend?
Controlling officer.
Controller.
Okay, yeah. So this controlling officer will negotiate with the budget review officer, okay, at the treasury. So simplifying budgeting process means that, you know, because it's based on past year spending, so budget review officer already understood, okay, how that was proposed and was approved. So the negotiation will become more straightforward, okay, because it's already approved and it's already understood. Because you must remember, that's the relationships, the communication between the treasury and the spending organizations. Okay, there's not only that must be approved by the parliament, but they must also make sure that the treasury is supporting them. Okay, to get the funding. Right, speed up budget assessment and evaluation, focusing on new activities. Right, so passive spending will become the benchmark. And then, so the more on negotiations toward new activities, what being proposed. Incremental budgeting narrow down the area open to dispute, just reduce conflict consistent with arguments. Changes should take place gradually rather than all at once. Okay, so a big chunk of the spending is basically based on past year activities. So in other words, traditional based budgeting, they allow that the previous activities to continue. Okay. That also relates to limitations of traditional based budgeting. First one, strategic goals of organizations. Organization here referring to public sector may not be achieved. TBS focus on object of expenditure rather than the program activities or objective organizations. Okay, focusing on financial accountability than advanced level of accountability. Okay, so in traditional budgeting, I think there is also dimension of performance. So the performance is based on mainly financial. Okay, they call it financial performance. Financial performance here is not like in the private sector when, okay, when you talk about financial performance, you talk about profit, maximizing profit. But here is basically the financial performance is spending the budget. Okay, so if the budget is located, let's say 1 billion, so that the controlling officers must make sure they spend all the money. Okay, because you may argue, oh, just spending, is it a good performance? Because planning must be good, and then they provide services to the public or to the target groups. This is government expenditures. Okay, very high, multiple objectives, right? But in terms of financial, okay, the most they can look at is how much they already spent, okay, based on their budget allocation. So that's why if they manage to spend the whole amount of budget, it's considered as good performance, okay? And but if you relate to the level of accountability, of course, financial accountability is the lowest level of accountability. Right, the third point, the performance of the budget is only measured from the financial aspects, the actual expenditure incurred versus budgeted expenditure, and no information on the effect, outcome, and benefits of programs. Okay, so all this you can see after the introduction of the new techniques. So based on the old technique, the traditional base, they don't have all this performance information except the expenditure spending level. Okay, but in any way, these reports, actual versus budget expenditure, remain very important until today. Okay, so even in the financial reporting later on, we'll discuss. This also become a good practice for government agencies to report to the public. Okay, and at the extreme, traditional base has no mention on specific program activities to be implemented. It's just focusing on inputs, okay, line item budgeting. So how much salary, how much assets to be spent. Okay, so we move on. Any question? Okay, so far so good. Right, of course, with the limitations of traditional base I think is very good in the very static environment. Okay, very consistent with the colonial time, where the government is basically to maintain a basic needs for the government. It's more on towards serving the colonial master rather than for the development of the country. Okay, so that is why it become problematic as to become as a main budgeting techniques for the government organizations. Right. Second technique is they call it zero-based budgeting. Okay, it was introduced in the US. Basically by the Pentagon, okay, the Ministry of Defense in the US, the Defense Department in the US. Right, so if you look at the features, the preparation of budget start from zero base. Okay, so I think based on the name is quite straightforward to understand. It means that like traditional based budgeting, focusing on past year spending based on existing activities, whereas zero base, everything is new. Okay, start new from scratch. Resources are not allocated based on previous year activities and expenditure levels. Each activity and expenditure item need to be justified with new budget proposal. Okay, so in zero-based budgeting, it's considered the old activities are not relevant for future activity, for future needs of the government and the people. Okay. Oops. Okay, so the features, okay, the main feature, it has, they call it decision package under zero-based budgeting. So in decision package, okay, you have to look at these characteristics. Identification of decision units, right? So to understand it a bit more, it's like a responsibility centers. So units in the organization's hierarchy that prepare the budget and have these characteristics: a specific manager, a well-defined and measurable impact, and well-defined and measurable objectives. Okay, of course, if you translate this to the current scenario, it's basically government organization. So if you look at the responsibility center, is basically a government organization, a division, a unit. Okay, like a kuliah, this faculty, this responsibility center. Right. So with that, once they have a decision unit, they develop decision package. Okay. identifying the alternative way of performing the functions of decision unit, and to determine the effort for each of the alternative. Okay, because once you have objective, you must develop relevant program, relevant activities. Okay, so in the case of our, I mean, if you want to relate that to current scenario, like our faculty, our kuliah, so we want to produce professional in economics, in business, in finance, in accounting, right? So what is the best way to do that? Okay, of course, I mean, this option, the best is basically we have a degree program, okay? But for, let's say, for defense, okay, so what is the best alternative to deliver so that they can have good defense? Right, that's the development of decision package. And then based on this, they review the package. So become what is the best alternative. So the best feasible way will be selected as the program and activities. And then funding should be provided for all those activities. Okay, the evaluation of zero-based, the advantage. Sec3b require all functions organization to be re-evaluated from zero. So encourage participative budgeting. In a way that I think another advantage is so that all activities and the services will be up to date. Okay, very relevant to the needs of the target groups or to the need of the customers. Okay, I can say that. So of course, customers here means customers in the public sector context. Okay, the target groups, because they develop based on what is current. Whereas the disadvantage is it's costly to implement, because evaluating all activities annually is impracticable. It's not possible, because you have to evaluate and to justify, because approval process is a lengthy time. Planning is also consume a lot of time, because you are talking about multiple managers, okay, limited resources, and then the needs of all the stakeholders, right, need to be taken into account. Even the planning process is time consuming to make people agree, decision making and all that. So it's quite costly. That's why it's good in principle, but hardly it was in practice. But nevertheless, the principles is good. Okay, so the idea is good, and I think in terms of ideas, it still remains until today. That's why it was replaced by the program-based budgeting, right? Launched in US in 1965, adopted in Malaysia in 1969. Okay, when it says adopted in Malaysia in 1969, actually these are global phenomena. It's not only Malaysian government is adopting program-based budgeting. I think this budget program is promoted by World Bank. Okay, so basically, so that it will adopt across the globe. I think government, each other, they learn from each other. Okay, the best practice, and particularly from the funding country, donor countries. Okay, they provide the support so that countries can develop and have a better system. Okay. So the objective to improve resource allocation, provide a common framework for the participants in the budgeting process. I think that's a common for budgeting techniques, basically improve resource allocation. Even if you introduce new techniques today, they will take that as a main objective, okay, to improve resource allocation. Not only that, and then of course to execute, to be able to execute the plan effectively. Covering operating budget and expenditures in the case of Malaysian government. Okay, operating budget. Okay, so what are the process? First is planning, identifying objective, and then programming. Okay, so you can see objective definitely at the government level. So what government need to focus. Okay, if you recently you can provide feedbacks to the survey. You can see the priorities area that government want to look at, including environment, okay, including entrepreneurships, including SMEs, including the disabilities. Okay, there are few, there are so many. So that is planning, and then how from the planning they translate into programming, okay, to support all those policies. Once you have the programs, so it will be based for budget preparation. So it means that budget will be distributed based on programs. So each program, okay, is basically become an organization, right? So, and each organization or each program will prepare budget. So, of course, in the eyes of the Treasury, they call a government organization is a program. Or maybe in the ministries, there are so many programs and sub-activities, okay? So what it means that is basically every program and approved activity, so budget will be provided for. So in other words, if organizations, they want to introduce new activity, but there is no support for the budget, so you can see that it's very difficult for them to implement those activities, okay? That's why otherwise they have to develop internal financing or internal funding, okay, through either their own income and others. So, but for certain government agencies, these are very limited because they cannot generate their own income, okay? Whereas some government agencies, they can generate their own income. So they have that level of flexibilities. But otherwise, it's quite restricted. That's why once they need to develop every activity into a program, get the approval from the Parliament and the Treasury for them to get the budget allocation, right? Of course, with the budget, they must prepare the budget and then get the budget to be approved and to get the funding, okay? Right, at the bottom there, program evaluation, it means that, just like zero-based budgeting, every program needs to be evaluated. In zero-based, it is evaluated every time annually. In the case of program-based, it should be done occasionally to make sure that the services provided is still relevant to serve the target groups. Okay, so there's a planning stage, okay, to identify clear objectives, okay, and activities of the government. Okay, importance of the objective, provide framework for better planning process to avoid duplication of functions at the various departments, right? So I think in a way that you can also avoid redundancies. Why redundancies need to be avoided? Anyone? Why redundancies of services need to be avoided? I hope your eyes still, sorry?
To cut costs.
Exactly, yeah. So that not to avoid waste, right? That's a simple way to say it. Right, and then programming. Okay, once they have the program, it's also to develop the best feasible alternative to achieve the objective. Okay, very similar to zero-based program. Okay. Right, if you look at a program, it's a combination of resources and formulated to realize objective and outputs. Example, road and bridges program in Ministry of Public Work. Okay, program structure, the process of breaking up program into distinct activities and sub-activities which contribute to the achievement of the objective. Okay, so for the example is for road and bridges, the sub-activity is maintenance service. Okay. Of course, I mean, because if you look at organizations, let's say URA as a program, okay? So you definitely in URA, there are so many activities. You must remember, each kuliah, okay, is an activity for funding purposes, right? And within the kuliah, there is a degree program. So each degree program is basically approved by the Treasury, okay? Then the funding will be provided. So in other words, okay, for me to get the salary, all these department's activities are basically approved by the Treasury. Okay, and then program evaluation, assessment of the relevance, result and impact of activities. Okay, so if you look at the bottom there, outdated activities should be considered for revision. So in other words, by right, okay, revision means, it also means that if the organizations, if the programs are no longer relevant, it should be closed or reorganized. But of course, in the government, there are also limitations, mostly because of the resources are fixed costs. So they can reorganize, but for them to be able to develop the best activities or how to develop, to use the best resources. Okay. So there are challenges, but I think by the time we finish all this discussion, you should be able to appreciate that what limitations are there that is in government, but what are the opportunities and flexibility that they should have so that they can deliver the services with value for money. Key advantage of program-based budgeting: promote clear lines of responsibility, thus enhancing accountability. Clear lines of responsibility means, for each program has very specific objective they must achieve. So based on that, they'll be accountable. So the funding will be provided, so there will be question, do you achieve your objective or not? So like just like IUM, being funded, let's say, now is around 300 million, then the top management will be questioned by the parent ministry, and the parent ministry will be questioned by the parliament. Promote efficiency and effectiveness of use of resources among public sector managers. So in a way, it provides platform for efficiency and effectiveness, because if you look at these two, is basically, with the given resources, there are impact and outcome and output need to be achieved. Provide better planning and control mechanism for the parliament to oversee executive functions. So each program, the parliament can question. Either member of parliament in the House of Senate or House of Representative, they can question, and even at the Public Account Committee, they can question. So in other words, the member of parliament can question. Let's say you are IUM. If IUM achieve the objective, no question. If IUM no longer achieve the objective, they can question. Why we need to support this university, whereas it can no longer achieve the objective. All right. So need to be justified. So in other words, with that, that's why the activities of the organizations, particularly in the government organizations, must be in line with their mission and objective. Because they are being given mandates by the government. So all the top management of the organizations, they must make sure, like IUM, we have IUM constitutions. These are because these are mandates from the government. So we need to achieve them. So violations or any activities which are ultra virus to the organizations need to be avoided. Otherwise, it can be questioned by the parliament, and can pose, it can be problematic as well. Right, provide a systematic method of performance evaluations. So I think this also highlighted and promoted under program-based budgeting. So the use of performance measures is already being promoted under program-based budgeting. It's not something new. Assist public sector organization in setting budget priorities between competing programs and activities. So definitely priorities based on management priorities are very important, very critical, because every organizations with the top management, with their skills and expectations, with their understanding of the environment that they work on, they must understand what are the priorities, because you cannot just deliver everything, otherwise it will compromise the way you achieve the objective. Right, of course, problems, implementation problems. Budget is used as an allocation tool rather than management tool. Programming is very successful, but the performance measure, and then to make sure that the better use of public funds, so there is problem. There was problem. Information system did not support the program-based budgeting. Of course, you are talking about 60s, basically 70s or 80s, where the information system is relatively I think for the basic financial accountability is the system of very, very good, right? For management information system, performance based, understanding the environment better, understanding the customer needs better. This can a bit limited. Goal and objective of the individual programs and activities are not clear and well defined. Should lead to greater political control and the use of cybernetic control. I think these are comments. Some of the comments here we took it from the audit reports, or basically or from the treasury. So these are some of the common complaints or critics against government organizations. Right, should lead to greater political control. Sometimes, I mean, to a certain extent, political control is very good when the members of parliament or the local elected officials, they can really bring forward the agenda of the people to the attention of the government. Then definitely that is a good move. If the system did not work, so cybernetic control means based on the organization system itself. Another problem in developing relevant performance indicators. So there was so that's why the main financial measure performance measure become financial measure. Financial measure was the main performance measure, okay? And then that financial measure is basically the level of spending. Successful implementing the first component program, but failed to implement the performance. Okay, the last, the resistance to change led to continuity of simplicity of incremental budgeting. Okay, resulting to a mixture of budget preparation approach, program-based and incremental budgeting. Okay. Right, additional issues of programming. What should be done to develop an effective program? Okay, what is effective program? Do we focus on structure, process, and culture? So what is structure? Clear lines of responsibility and accountability. So what is the process? So should we have more managerialism or more bureaucratic in the orientation of how to run the government organizations? Okay. Any comment? Programming. So in other words, new activities and new program of the government is an ongoing effort. Okay. So you can see new activities or new initiative being introduced by the government, particularly to support their manifesto or maybe the current needs. I think last time there was a question by one of the students mentioning, okay, if you compare between the public infrastructures as compared to Peninsula Malaysia to East Malaysia, so more improvement are needed for East Malaysia. So these are all expansion of programs, okay, and activities beside new activities. So existing activities be expanded to the new area. This also can be considered as a new program. Additional issues in public finance. Okay, so fiscal control to control budget deficit. So fiscal control is a technique, I think it's promoted by the World Bank. So basically what happened is fiscal control means, because fiscal expenditures is government expenditures, so basically to cap the limit, of spending, as simple as that, okay, to cap the limit of the budget. Why it is needed? Because across the globe, government are basically facing with a serious budget deficit, okay? So they take loans. Of course, there are two school of thoughts with regard to budget deficit. One is mentioning that government can never go bankrupt, but there are also arguments that government can go bankrupt. So how you explain that? Right. So that's why the how to address this is basically to provide cap. So I mean, just like yourself, okay, for you to be, to spend. But for individuals, it's quite easy. They can only spend. The maximum is based on their salary or their income, and then the level of debt that they can take. Okay, but they cannot take all the debts because then it will pose danger. Of course, for individual, they can face the risk of bankruptcy. Okay, but for the government, they need to cap the budget. But it's not easy to implement because now with the budget, with the COVID, okay, and pandemic, slow economic growth, but still people need to spend, to just the level of quality of life. So the risk of huge budget deficit is always there. Okay, budget deficit financed by loan, internal and external borrowings may push up cost of borrowing in financial market, cut down private investment. Okay, so I think that's because if you look at in terms of security, relatively, particularly during the crisis, so the investors are more willing to provide funding to the government as opposed to the private sector. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. Another, of course, the government is competing against the private sector. Okay, as a result to push up the cost of borrowing. But that is in general. But if you look at what happened nowadays, the interesting part is across the globe is the interest rate is near what? The interest rate is near. Anyone? Are you still with me, class?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the interest rate is near what? Or the central bank's rate, very near to You don't read business news, do you? Do you read business news?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Oh, you should. You should, huh? Get yourself updated with the current news, okay, particularly on the economic development, as well as overall financial market. Yeah, you can, if you talk about financial reporting nowadays, you would expect significant impairments of many assets, because of the economic scenarios. So that's the demand of IFRS or MFRS. So you need to know the kind of issues, in a way to look at it, okay? But yes, nowadays I think the central bank rate is near zero, okay? So near zero. Right, so near zero can be good, it can be bad as well, huh? Okay, right, so the end. Okay, what photo is that?
Damn.
Dam, what else?
Reach.
Reach, what else?
Highway, sir.
Damn.
Highway, what else?
Damn.
Dam. With the dam, you have what?
River.
It has electric.
Exactly, electricity, isn't it? Power station. So if you look at this photo, is all about public service, isn't it? Either directly provided by the government or partnership with the private sector. Okay, dokie. Any question? I think that's why I choose this photo. Huh? It's interesting to look at.
Sir,
Okay.
how a government pay their debt?
How?
How a government going to pay their debt?
Okay, how government to pay their debt? There are two ways. Okay, one is from income. Okay, second is refinancing. Right, refinancing. If you look at in the case of nation government, okay, they have debts. So if you look at the one who managing the government securities is Bank Negara. So you can see that all of these bonds are basically, or sukuk, have different maturities. So they can issue new bonds, okay, to refinance. Of course, that's the least option, but have to be done, need to be done. The second, definitely based on income. So if they can collect more income, they can pay their debts better. Okay, and that's why yeah, you can study that. So I just give you a brief guidance. So refinancing. There was also an argument of printing the money, but that's why the role of central bank is very important, to make sure that of course they can to make sure that everything is in balance. Okay, good question. Another question. You can look at, yes.
Does the country's high GDP reflect the country's debt?
Oh, countries with high GDPs most likely will have higher debts. Not necessarily. If you look at China, okay, China is huge GDP, but relatively okay compared to other countries for the government, because they have I think, of course, as a country also they have surplus. For their export they have surplus, as well as the government also they have budget surplus. So as a result, they have because they have so much money, but they need to, get somewhere, isn't it? So they have to fund other countries so that other countries can spend more. So it's basically a powerhouse to the rest of the world, and developing countries as well. But to answer your questions, for the government they need to avoid. I think you are referring only to the government debts, for the government debts. So, of course, I mean, at the end, they must have their budget balance. That's one. The other is sometimes fiscal expenditures have their role, particularly for developing countries. Why they need to spend? Because they need to stimulate the economic growth. Okay, that will relate to job employment, that will relate to income level. But the issue is where they have to spend. Okay, that's why they have to spend in good sectors, in sectors which will create more productivity in the future. So that's why if you look at some authors, some economic authors, that's why government, if they want to invest or they want to spend for fiscal expenditures or for the upskilling of the people, or just focus on their main concern should be high added value activities. Okay, high added value technology. So like Malaysia is no longer sufficient to just focus on the our country. Of course, we have FDI, but the FDI, but for low value added activities. Okay, sometimes our country just become a conduit country because we have what do you call it, FDI, but the FDI is basically all the materials and everything is we use foreign materials. So our local is basically we just prepare them or provide them with the location. Okay, so I think in the future they must focus on more productive sectors, technology, environment, okay, and high advanced technology. So in that manner. Okay. Any other? From my response, you can develop other questions. You can disagree with me, okay? I'm not giving you, that's my opinion. You might say, I disagree with you, sir. Okay, why not? I like that.
Sir,
Okay.
sir, I want to ask about the online assignment one.
Okay.
Okay, for the digital report, should we do in the point form or like a long essay written report?
Okay, I did clearly mention in the guideline, it should be PowerPoint format. Must be interesting.
Okay, all right, so thank you.
PowerPoint format. Even you are, yes, okay. PowerPoint format. So make it as professional as possible. So look at the assignment carefully. Of course, the written report is in the PowerPoint format, but the video presentation, okay, so I put creativity quite a big 30% marks. So then you can tell that by reading your PowerPoint is so plan properly. I don't want to give you unnecessary pressure, but I think if you plan early, as much as you can, because time is limited as well. I know everybody is busy and very tight, okay, but you are very creative, I know.
Sir, how many chapters
Sorry?
for the
For the?
midterm?
Okay, midterm, yes, Brother Tanwir.
So how many chapters for that?
Okay, I plan the midterm up to budgetary control. Okay, so it's like the topic before the midterm exam. But we'll finalize the topics.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Right, if last question.
So about the ebook last time, do you have?
Oh, the book.
Yeah.
You're asking about the online book, huh? Okay, I was asking the publisher, but they did not respond. Maybe they don't have.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Right. If no question, then I think okay, I will end the lecture. Okay, and I will end the lecture. And but if you have any questions after I end this session, you can always okay, you can stay back and ask questions. I think I also have a group wanted to have a session after this. All right. So with that, I end this with wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Thank you, sir.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.